Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave and Evelyn from the camera store, and today we're talking about the Canon EOS R3. After two pre-announcements, Evelyn, finally it is here.
Yes, it was the longest game ever waiting for this camera to be properly announced so that we could know all of the details. And Dave and I had the opportunity to get a pre-production unit in our hands thanks to Canon Canada. And we want to tell you what we think about it. We want to let you know why we think that this camera actually might deserve the crown of getting called the flagship camera. We're also going to talk about whether or not Canon missed anything when designing this new mirrorless full-frame camera.
Now, one word comes to mind when I'm talking about this camera, and it's all about speed. I mean, we're talking 30 frames per second with a brand new sensor.
Now this is a 24 megapixel full frame, backside illuminated, stacked complementary metal oxide semiconductor, yo. And I mean, the most important thing is that it's a stacked sensor, which means it's super fast scanning, and it opens up the door to a lot of new features and some exciting possibilities.
Things like electronic shutter is a very valuable thing, and it's how we're achieving our 30 frames per second. But first, let's talk about the design of this camera. This is the first R body with the integrated grip, which I really like.
Dave is so happy with the feel of this camera, and it's super light. It's kind of surprising because the 1DX Mark III, although it wasn't crazy heavy, this is 71% lighter.
71%, that's massive. So with the battery in it, it's just over 1,000 grams. So until you actually feel the 1DX and the R3 side by side, you're not going to really realize how incredibly light this package is.
Yeah, and it doesn't sacrifice on quality though. This has all the same weather sealing rating as the 1DX Mark III, and I just really like the design of it. It has a lot of different control functions. It has illuminated buttons. I like that it has the control also A-off button so that you can adjust your autofocus point super quickly across the entire sensor.
Yeah, and we are, speaking of sensors, it is an image stabilized sensor in keeping with the R5 and the R6.
Yeah, and this gives you up to 8 stops of image stabilization. And another exciting thing is the autofocus system is top notch, and it's exciting to see that this can actually focus in the dark. It's rated to minus 7.5 EV, which is a very impressive number. But what we did is we did some great autofocus tests. So there's some exciting new technology. Actually, before we get into that, let's talk about the homage to the past. So I don't have the R3 with us anymore because they took it away, but this is my pride and joy. This was my Canon EOS 3. This had a cool feature called eye control autofocus.
Yeah, and I had the old A2E, which had the same thing.
Yeah.
It was very cool because it would calibrate to your eye, and how cool is it? Wherever you look is where the autofocus point is set as soon as you trip the shutter. That's very cool.
Yeah, and we haven't seen this technology around in a very long time, but Canon's putting this into the R3. And the great thing is, for Dave, is it worked great for him.
I was quite impressed with it because I was able to calibrate it, and Canon allows you to sort of keep adding to your calibration. So you can do it horizontal, you can do it vertical, you can do it in the sunshine, do it in the shade. As your eye changes shape or your pupil sizes change, right, you can keep adding data to that. So the camera's going to get better and better with your eye.
Yeah, it's like deep learning on the spot with your own eyeball. Now my eyeballs, unfortunately, did not calibrate with it for some reason. We don't know if it's because it was pre-production or it's because I have beautiful long eyelashes that Dave doesn't have. We don't know. But the sad thing is I wasn't able to test it out myself, and hopefully that's something that we'll be able to check out again once we get a full production unit.
Yeah, and now the whole point of eye control focus is it's the quickest thing to change your autofocus points with. If you're looking through a scene and you're watching some action coming towards you, for instance, and the action moves to a different place that the camera's not tracking, I can simply release my finger, look to what I wanted to shoot, and refresh the shutter button, and away it goes. It's acquired some new focus points.
Yeah, so not only did they put this new technology in the camera, they also refined their awesome tracking autofocus that we saw in the R5 and the R6. And we were quite impressed with that autofocus system. But I have to say, when we were at the Motocross track, Dave and I tested out the vehicle priority for shooting the bikes. And the thing that we noticed is that it was more responsive, more sticky, more accurate than even the R5. And that's saying a lot because the R5 was quite impressive. Yeah, we were kind of going back and forth. We're like, wow, you notice it. It's just the behavior is slightly different.
And what's impressive, all that deep learning is applied to all our autofocus profiles. So birds and animals and people, it's looking for the eyes, looking for the face. But when it comes to motorsports, it's looking for goggles. And if it finds the shape of a car, it's looking for the driver. Now, we only had a full day with this camera, so we tried to do as much as we possibly could with it. And I can tell already that you want to spend a little bit more time refining the autofocus system. Now, right out of the box, like by default settings,
it's on tracking, yeah.
It's on tracking, and it works so well. But you want to spend a little bit more time, I find, really getting to know it and getting to work with it to see what scenarios work best for you. But you have so many different ways of customizing it. There are multiple ways of choosing your autofocus points.
Yeah, you have a whole bunch of different interfaces that you can work with. You can do the eye control, you can use the smart controller, that's the name of that button that I was trying to remember, which allows you to very quickly move your autofocus points around. You also now have the home position, which is new for Canon and their mirrorless lineup. And then of course you still have the multi-controller joystick, so you can operate it more classically if that's your preference. And you have tons of focus points, so you can go all around the sensor if you want and just do it the classic way.
Now, along with that new backside illuminated stack sensor and its fast readout speed, we have an improved electronic shutter. So we used to be with the R5 limited to 1/8,000th of a second with electronic shutter. Now with this new R3, we are at what? 1/64,000th of a second.
Yeah, so that allows you to like shoot into the light, and you can shoot wide open on a bright sunny day without having to use ND filters.
For me, there's not a lot of reason to actually shoot the R3 with a mechanical shutter. We've got faster frames per second available to us. Now, this was a big gripe with me actually with the R5. It's one of the few things, I love that camera, but I didn't like how it was perfectly silent when I was shooting in 20 frames per second.
Yeah,
now,
you like that feedback.
Yeah, now I'm not always in a church or a museum where it's like ultimate quiet kind of scenario, so give me some feedback. Now the R3 gives you that feedback with an optional clicking sound that you can use. Now if you still want to have that pure silent system when you're out somewhere, you can plug headphones in and still hear it where other people can't.
And the other thing is you basically have blackout free shooting now. Not something that we saw on the R5 and R6, but now you're pretty much fully blackout free.
And one more thing I forgot to talk about was the ability to use flash with this camera.
Oh yeah.
Now usually we have to use a mechanical shutter with the Canon systems, but this is the first Canon camera we actually have electronic shutter and flash sync capability. So with full electronic shutter, we're at 1/180th of a second. This is very cool and keeps you from using a mechanical shutter.
Yeah, now another thing that we love about this camera we haven't talked about yet is the electronic viewfinder. This is a gorgeous electronic viewfinder. It's very big and bright. It has 0.76 magnification. I find that it has good eye relief, and most of all, it's a nice high resolution EVF. So it's 5.76 million dots, and you can configure this too. So if you're someone that just loves shooting with an optical viewfinder and you like that more natural experience, they've even taken care of you there because they have a new optical simulation mode where it just gives you natural looking experience.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that they give you the option to customize the camera to what you want.
Yeah.
And something I found, I don't know if it has in the R5 has this option, but in the exposure preview, you can actually use exposure preview plus depth of field preview. So I thought this was super cool, being able to look at my subject matter with the fast prime lens and dial down my aperture and really see the depth of field that I'm going to achieve when I take the picture.
It also has a nice refresh rate. You have two different options. So you have the smooth mode, which I would use all the time. It's 120 frames per second refresh rate. Or if you want to save some power consumption, because this is a power hungry camera, you can dumb it down to 60 frames per second refresh speed.
It is a very powerful camera, but it does have the same battery found in the 1DX Mark III, which is the LPE19. It's a big battery tucked into that integrated grip.
In terms of the media for this camera, we have, just like the R5, a CF Express memory card, as well as a UHS-2 SD card slot, which you always like.
Well, I do like having dual card slots, but I wish they just picked one card type to choose. I'd rather have two CF Express cards with a camera at this level.
What makes this camera the all-around powerhouse that I think it is to deserve that flagship crown is it's really spec'd out for video too. So we have a 6K DCI raw recording right to the memory card. That's only to the CF Express memory card, of course. You need it to be super fast. But you can also shoot in 4K all intra up to 120 frames per second. And it has some pretty impressive features as well. Of course, that in-body image stabilization up to 8 stops. You can shoot a lot of handheld stuff. Now, of course, you're probably all asking about what about overheating, because that was a big issue that came out when the R5 was announced. A lot of people had concerns about this, but they've They've fine-tuned the system a bit. At launch of this camera, we have 2 different modes that you can work with. You can use a standard mode, which will shut it off at 25-minute 6K recording, or you can have a high heat mode. And Canon's saying that you can get 60 minutes plus in this high heat mode. And the only caveat to that is it makes your media really hot to the touch. And so you have to be super careful with that. But it's nice to see that they've mitigated some of those concerns that we saw in the previous model. We really like this camera, Dave.
I do. From the texture of the body, to the fit and finish of the body, to the ergonomics, really, Canon really knows how to make a great feeling camera. Like, it truly becomes this silly extension of your hand. It's such a cliche statement, I hate saying it. But the more I worked with it, even on the one day that I had it, it felt so comfortable and I was so at ease with the button placement.
Yeah, Canon's always designed beautifully feeling cameras. And it still boggles my mind what we're saying right now, because the Canon EOS R line has come such a long way in the last few years.
Yes.
I mean, they started very kind of light pace and we're kind of like, huh, what? And now we have such a robust camera that, you know, we're talking about it being basically the flagship, but they're not calling it the flagship. So it makes you wonder what's to come in the future.
I know, what are they gonna do? Are you gonna go 40 frames a second? Or 50 frames per second? Are we gonna, you know, make the camera heavier?
Yeah. I think it checks a lot of boxes for a lot of different types of photographers. It's a multimedia powerhouse. It'd be great for journalists, it'd be great for sports photographers, weddings. I see a lot of practical applications of how this camera could be integrated into a lot of people's workflow.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff we haven't even touched about on this camera already. Things that are brand new for Canon, like the multi-interface hot shoe, which allows you to put on XLR ports or different microphones, but also little touches like an incognito mode. If you're shooting in a theater, for instance, or someplace you have to be really stealthy, you can black out the entire camera so no lights or anything flicker and cause any kind of grief. Imagine being on a movie production set or something like that. This would be amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of boxes that have been checked here, and of course we want to know, what do you guys think of the camera? Does it check all your boxes? What do you think of the direction of Canon in the EOS R lineup? Let us know in the comments below.
Make sure you follow us on Instagram.
And if you're new to our channel, please subscribe, hit that like button, and we'll catch you again very soon.
Hey, thanks for sticking around and watching our first look at the Canon EOS R3. If you want to check out more videos, click up here. And if you are Canadian and you want to shop local, check out thecamerastore.com down here.